Welcome back, everybody. So today we're going to get into a video that was requested by a viewer that's interested in moving to industry. And the video that they requested is to go over what are some of the challenges that somebody coming from academia is going to face as they enter industry. And we've kind of talked a little bit about this before in the past, but in this video we're going to dive more into the first, half year or so of being in industry and what it's really like. So if you have any kinds of comments below about things that you want to know about jumping into industry, leave them down below. If you have any other questions, make sure to leave them down below. I try to make videos about certain videos I think might apply to a broader audience, or I even will answer down in the comments section. So let's get into it today. So when you're going to be moving from academia over to industry, I'm going to mainly focus on PhDs. For people that are coming from a master's level, it's not going to be all that different. It's going to be a lot of the same hands-on work in the lab. But for PhDs, it's going to be quite different. So when you first start in industry, you're going to have some differences depending on the type of work in industry you do. So there's obviously large companies and small companies. A bigger company like Pfizer versus a startup, and then there's everything in between. But within these companies, there's different roles. So there are people that are going to be doing research that are in really early base discovery research. And this is really similar to what you do in a postdoc, okay? This is going to be going in, reading papers, so say that you're a CNS company. So you go in and you're reading papers about CNS targets, and you're doing collection of CNS tissues and staining that goes along with it, maybe electrophysiology if that's what's needed. Maybe you're doing in vivo work with memory. You're going to be doing a lot of this investigational type work. And that's probably going to feel very similar to what you did in grad school and a postdoc. However, you could be like me and end up in a position that's more on the late preclinical side, so just before clinical testing. And this is a much more regulated environment. And so your work isn't as exploratory based, it's more dealing with regulated studies that are going to be submitted to things like the FDA or the EMA. And when you do that, it's quite different because you don't have the flexibility to structure your studies any which way you want. There's a very structured way that you need to go about your work. And it takes time to learn what is this structure and how do you conform to it, and what wiggle room do you have, and how can you deal with any kind of authorities that you need to deal with. So it's a little bit different. The other big difference that you're going to have is the meeting schedules. So I think that a lot of scientists are not ready for the amount of meetings that they're going to have to go to. So when you're in grad school, you have class that you juggle at the beginning, but then as you move on, you're kind of just in the lab until you're writing your dissertation. And as a postdoc, obviously, you're going to spend 90+% of your time in the lab. When you go into industry, you're going to have to spend a lot of time in the lab, but you're going to have a lot of meetings. And when I say a lot of meetings, I'm talking about you might have 15 to 20 hours of meetings a week. So you're going to be spending, 10, 20, 30, 50% of your time a week in meetings. And it's a big thing to get used to. Like, how do you actually structure your day so that your experiments could go and that your meetings don't interrupt your lab work? And, being able to schedule your experiment so that you could juggle lunch and this meeting and that meeting, it can be kind of, tricky at first. So that's definitely something that you're going to have to get used to, is just a sheer amount of meetings that you have to go to. It's quite a lot. The other thing is the corporate structure. So basically figuring out like who you report to and who they report to, and figuring out who are their peers, who are your peers, who are people that are not reporting to you but are a lower level than you that might look to you for advice. Really figuring out that corporate structure of like, what is an associate scientist or a principal scientist? What do all these positions mean? And what are their importance and their role within the company, right? Everyone has an important role in the company. Just because someone has a higher title or a lower title doesn't mean that they're more or less important. Everyone's job is important. That's why it's there. But figuring out who, where you fit into the organization and where your department fits into the organization, and figuring out where everyone, fits together. That's really an important, step, and it takes time, and it takes time to get to know everyone and for them to get to know you. Another thing that could come up that could be very different is if you have to take on your own reports. So some of you are going to go into industry and be what's called an independent contributor, meaning that you go in and you basically have a supervisor that you report to, and that's it. You're not really responsible for the actions of anybody else. And for example, in my company, there's a lot of the scientists have no reports. Some people have one report. So you might come out of your postdoc and come in and all of a sudden have someone that reports to you. You're their boss, their manager. And so you're responsible for their day-to-day work. You're responsible for their career development. You're responsible for their promotions, for their evaluations, for making sure that they do everything on track. And, if they miss and they don't do what they're supposed to do, it's not just them that looks bad, it's you that looks bad. And likewise, when they succeed, it's not just them that looks good when they succeed. You also look good when they succeed. So some people are going to have to deal with one person. Some people will be like myself and have multiple people that report to them. You might have 2, 3, 4 people that report into you. And so then you have an entire team. And so it's not just one person that you're in charge of an entire group. And now, just like when you were a postdoc and you would go to a lab meeting, you need to have your own lab meetings, and you need to oversee a whole group's effort and make sure that everybody's getting the right work for them, and that it's structured in a way that makes sense and that everyone thinks is fair. These kinds of management skills aren't really something that they teach in graduate school or in a postdoc. And I really wish that they would, because this is really important. And pretty much all of us that go through and get a PhD, whether you go into academia or industry or anywhere, odds are at some point you're going to be responsible for somebody and you're going to have to manage somebody. And it's really a shame that they don't teach you the most effective way to do that and how to, communicate clearly. Hopefully though, and again, things adding in that are different in industry is that if you are a manager, that your company gives you resources on how to be a manager. And so that's another difference. When you're in your postdoc, you may go to certain classes that are science-based, and that's good. But in a company, on top of doing scientific training, it's really crucial that you build yourself and your network, and you go to trainings within the company or external, however they do it, but I'm sure the company will offer things in one way or another where you learn about networking, about communicating with empathy, about connecting with peers, about management, about how to have effective communications with your own supervisor. These are really important skill sets, and something that really, I think, more than anything else sets people apart in industry is I see a lot of brilliant people that don't have those soft skills quite ironed out, and it seems they're the ones that move the slowest up the corporate ladder in industry. And those that really have honed that skill of effectively communicating with others, with building relationships, with just getting to know people, not just within your group, but within the organization, are the ones that seem to move up the fastest. I think that that's a really important skill, and a good observation that I hope that those of you that are watching that go into industry take note of. And the last thing that I'll really point out is just the difference in scope of work. So when you're in academia, mechanism is king, right? There is nothing more important than mechanism. And if you give a talk and you don't have a mechanism, and you just have this like observatory discussion of like, well, we did this experiment and we observed this, but we don't quite know the mechanism, it loses just a lot of luster. And the PIs take years and years or decades trying to work out mechanisms. And that's really the driving force. And it's really, really crucial to moving science forward is understanding the mechanism. That's really crucial. Understanding that is how we've advanced science for centuries, right? It's not that it's not important. But in industry, the patient is what's important and the mechanism is not. And so things move very quickly, and the mechanism is not something that's focused on. People want a surface level understanding, and they want to know it quickly and move on to the next thing, because you don't have years to do something when you need to develop your next drug quickly. So that's something to also keep in mind, is that the focus is a lot different. One is a mechanism focused thing. The other, in industry, is more of a how can we help the patient today type of mindset. And so it leads to two different types of science, one not better than the other, but different nonetheless. Okay? So I think we could wrap it up there. There are definitely other differences, but just kind of thinking to myself a little bit today in terms of what are the differences, these are the ones that stand out to me. And, it's really hard to give a clear-cut answer of how to best survive your first 6 months in industry, because each person's circumstances are going to be different, right? So if you're in early research in a startup company as an individual contributor, meaning no direct reports, you're going to have a really different experience when you go into industry than if you go to a super large company with a whole team of reports and you're in late preclinical development and it's all regulated work. They're very different. So it's hard to give a one size fits all answer. But I think the thing that I'm going to suggest is that you really have discussions early and often with whoever your manager is and set clear expectations. One of the hardest things when you go into industry is that you have a lack of understanding of what the expectations are of you. And if you could really get a good grasp early on of this is what my boss expects me to be doing, you're just going to get rolling that much faster, because you'll actually be able to do something that they, want you to be doing, rather than just like shadowing this person and shadowing that person. You'll be able to get in on the ground running and do something. So I hope this, is helpful for people that are thinking about going into industry. These are just the things that I've been thinking, to myself today of, what are the differences and what should somebody expect in their first, few months? Trying to think back to my first few months in industry. What did I find very different about industry than being in academia? With that, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.